jumping from biblical archaeology yesterday to medieval history, to Crusader Jerusalem. And our topic is the city of King of Kings, Crusader Jerusalem or Frankish Jerusalem, and I'll explain the difference in terminology. The question I would like to address today is pilgrimage enough to keep a city alive? At present, when governments are debating when and how to resuscitate tourism, this question may have special relevance. The arena is Jerusalem, the period, the Crusader era. The days of Jerusalem, its history, is counted in millennia. And until quite recently, archaeologists viewed artifacts and historical facts from 900 years ago as little more than recent gossip. But although the Crusaders ruled Jerusalem a mere 103 years, the impact on the city was profound. Walking in the old city of Jerusalem, a modern tourist is bound to meet remnants of the Crusaders, and the impact of the city of the King of Kings is still felt in many European cities. Sparked by an appeal by Pope Urban II in November 1095, the Crusaders conquered Jerusalem in 1099 and ruled the Holy Land until the conquest of the Mamluks in 1291. But that is the rule of the Latin Kingdom. The Frankish rule in Jerusalem was shorter. The Crusaders lost Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187, and except for the period between 1229 and 1244, Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands until General Allenby rode into the city in December 1917, seeing himself as a modern crusader. The aim of the Crusaders was to liberate the holy city Jerusalem from Muslim rule and turn it into a Christian city. This slogan motivated hundreds of thousands of people in Europe to leave their homes and livelihoods and venture on what looked like an impossible mission, crossing most of the known world on horse or on feet, and fighting the way for 3 years to reach and conquer the heavenly city on the 15th of July, 1099. Now, if you look here, those are the main four groups. There are more, but the group from Germany is so-called People's Crusade that crossed all Eastern Europe to Constantinople, the lower lands, the northern France group also crossed, and arrived at Constantinople. The group from Toulouse, from southern France, and the southern Italian, Sicilian group of Normans, all of them met in Constantinople. And from there, they fought their way through today's Asia Minor, that is the Seljuk Turkey, conquered Antioch, and finally got to Jerusalem. After a long siege, they succeeded. They followed the horrendous bloodbath of the Muslim Fatimid inhabitants and Jews who lived in the city. The Crusaders were able to purify the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and baptize the former Muslim holy places on the Temple Mount to Christianity, and expel any non-Christians from Jerusalem. So they won. But how does one live in earthly Jerusalem with its decimated population and make it the capital of the nascent Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem? Scholars have different views of what the Crusaders encountered on arriving in Jerusalem. In a recent book, The Collapse of the Eastern Mediterranean, Climate Change and the Decline of the East, 950 to 1072, Ronnie Ellenblum claims that the severe climatic changes in medieval East caused extensive periods of drought, the collapse of the water system, and the decline of the thriving cities, among them Jerusalem. In his words, I quote, "Scores of cities underwent catastrophic decline together with the villages that supplied them. Jerusalem only regained part of its glory during the Mamluk period." End of quote. According to Ellenblum, the city could not possibly have sustained a large population. He maintains that the city the Crusaders conquered was actually already in deep decline, notwithstanding the fact that it took the Crusaders' army 5 weeks to break into the city. It is certainly true that Jerusalem never became the economic center of the Frankish kingdom. That role was played by Tyre and Acre, the ports, which were bustling centers of trade and served as the entrance to the Holy Land and the main channel of communication with the land from which the Crusaders originated. You see on the map the huge empire the Crusaders conquered in a generation, in less than a generation. Here is the Latin kingdom. From Beirut to El Arish, on both sides of the Jordan, that is Israel and Jordan, part of Lebanon of today. The county of Tripoli, that is Lebanon. The Principality of Antioch, Syria and parts of today's Turkey, and the most eastern, northeastern county of Edessa that compassed part of today's Iraq. All that in less than a generation. By comparison, Jerusalem was indeed awkwardly situated and not economically alluring. However, we must remember that ideology and spiritual factors have historical consequences. People were motivated not only by economic and rational reasons, although they were important. Christian pilgrims who came to Jerusalem with or in the wake of the Crusades were medieval tourists. Although the stay in Jerusalem required an existing infrastructure, the presence in the city had tangible economic results and affected the cityscape and the surrounding hinterland. Looking for everyday life in earthly medieval Jerusalem to test this theory of economic life fueled by tourism, we will consult 4 types of sources. First, contemporary chronicles that mention everyday life in Frankish Jerusalem. When I say Frankish, the Crusaders were the conquerors, the settlers, and the second and coming generations were Franks. That was what the inhabitants of the era called them, Farangi. The second source, kind of source, itineraria and maps that describe the cityscape. 3, the register of transaction of landed property made in the city, sales and donations of land under Frankish rule that attest the existence of economic activity. And finally, archaeological remains of Frankish building activity, both public buildings such as churches and hospitals, and private institutions such as the shops and taverns that catered both to pilgrims and the regular residents. Sorry. Although those sources for Crusader Jerusalem are richer than those for other periods, they have their limitations. I begin with the first type, the Crusader chronicles. What can we learn from the chronicles? Many chronicles describe the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, and as compared to other important medieval events, it receives more space in the accounts. I don't think there is one medieval historian who doesn't give some space, often much space, to the events of the Crusades. The chroniclers, most clerics, were more interested in exceptional political military events, battles, and miracles than in everyday life in the city. Thus, they describe the conquest of 1099, the civil war in 1153, the fall of the city to Saladin in 1187, and the treaty between Frederick II, the emperor, and Al-Kamil of Egypt that divided Jerusalem between Christian and Muslim rule and gave the Franks another 15 years of rule in the city from 1229 to 1244. However, when a chronicler does give us a glimpse of everyday life, his report must be considered reliable, as it is not prejudiced by his agenda. When writing about Hugh of Caesarea's revolt against King Fulk of Anjou in 1132 and his subsequent trial, William of Tyre, the most important chronicler of the First Kingdom, was mainly interested in the gossip that the young and handsome count had an affair with Queen Melisende. But the fact that Hugh was not executed but only sentenced to exile shows that the revolt had important backers and was not just a romantic story. William provides the following description of an assassination attempt on the count while he was waiting to be expelled from the kingdom. Quote, "One day, he happened to be playing dice on a table before the shop of a merchant called Alphanus in the street which is called the Street of the Furriers, Ruga Parmenteriorum." This snapshot of city streets is 12th century street in the nowadays market near the Holy Sepulchre, in which people sit outside the shops, play dice, and probably eat, is reflected in the Frankish name of one of the main streets in 12th century Jerusalem, Malkizinat, bad cooking, or perhaps fast food. It says something of what the visitors thought of the Levantine cuisine. This was centuries before the inventions of cafes, and attests to a city in which visitors needed a place to sit and eat or play, not just fight and pray. This need was evidently met and almost certainly had positive economic results. With respect to the physical cityscape, our data come from itineraria, travel accounts, and maps. The best sources for the layout of Jerusalem are the itineraria that have been translated by John Wilkinson for the 12th century and Dennis Pringle for the 13th, and the pilgrim maps of Jerusalem. We must take into account, however, the focus on holy sites. That was what they came from, that's what was what interested them. The Hague map is a colorful example of a Crusader and pilgrim map. Note that, of course, the map is oriented differently from modern maps. It is oriented, that is, the Orient is on the top, the East is on the top. Nonetheless, we can easily choose the Frankish city with it. Those are the two main roads, one from Bethlehem and one from Neb Samuel, to the city, we go into the gate, the western side, the present-day Jaffa Gate, and walk on the main street, seeing David's Tower, the citadel, on the right. Actually, we're walking on the Roman Decumanus. That is also was the main street in Frankish Jerusalem. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is on the left. Here is the sepulchre, the cross of the Golgotha, and the Scissus Lapis, the rent rock. Those were three different churches that the Crusaders made into one. Going from there, we see the second focus of holiness, the Temple Mount, with where the Dome of the Rock, Templum Domini by the Crusades, and El Aqsa, Templum Salomonis, Solomon's Temple, take up almost half of the map. Thus, the main artery was a road from west to east. The novelty of this layout becomes evident when compared to the late Byzantine Madba map. There, the entrance is from the north, the Damascus Gate, the Bab el Amud. The main artery is a corridor, is one focal point of 1.5, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Nea on Mount Zion. The Temple Mount is all but obliterated. But like modern tourist maps, and I was astonished to see how similar they are. This is a pilgrim tourist map attached to one of the brochures of a travel agent. And if you look at what they show, it's again the holy places. Here you even don't even have the streets, just the foci of holiness. In the same way, the medieval maps were interested in tourist attractions, holy places, churches built to commemorate them, where to change money, and where to sleep. This is the Bruxelles map. You can see it's the same, actually it's the same map, the same round, perfect circle of Jerusalem, which of course is not the case in reality. The same, here it's more schematic, the same gate with the corridor and the Decumanus, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Templum Domini and Temple of the Lord and Temple of Solomon. And here we have the fair forum where one can buy things, Forum Verum Venalium, and the Cambium Monete, the place where one changes money. But usually, the regular life of everyday citizens did not interest them. For example, if we look at the same map, the southwestern part of medieval Jerusalem did not have any Latin holy places, churches. They had the Armenian church, but that was not the story. So what we see here actually belongs to the northwestern quarter. This is a compound of the Hospitallers with a church, hospice, and hospital. And it actually belongs here, to this part. Perhaps the southern part, the empty part, was where the citizens of Jerusalem, the Burgenses, the everyday people lived, but they were not important, so they were not shown. But the Hospitallers who provided for pilgrims, very important. So they were moved on the map from the north to the south where there was place, because the cartographer apparently didn't want to have an empty space, and here he didn't have place enough. So what we learn from the maps is the location of the holy sites and churches, the money changers, the hostels, but very little information about more mundane sites. One of the maps, not this one, it's not written here, but it's located here, shows a tavern. Again, an institution that was probably visited by tourists and inhabitants alike, but was not deemed important enough to be noted on most of the pilgrims' maps. Those two are just some few of a large list of maps. Jerusalem's economy was based on its being the administrative capital of the Latin kingdom, the city of the king, and at the same time, the city of the king of kings, Civitas Regis Regnorum, city of the king of kings, as found on the royal seals of Baldwin II, Amalric, and Jean de Brienne. If you look at this seal, it depicts the same three main buildings as the pilgrim maps: the Holy Sepulchre, the Dome of the Rock, that is the Temple of the Lord, and the Tower of David, here much more prominent, as it is a symbol of royal authority. The pilgrims, medieval tourists, spent the money in the city, used the hostels, purchased food and souvenirs in the market, and served as an important source of income for the city and the kingdom. Even if each denarium is an individual account, it should be seen as representing a large number of pilgrims, just as Seewulf in 1102 tells us that he was the sole survivor of many ships that arrived in Jaffa laden with pilgrims, and this is just 3 years after the conquest. Our third kind of source of evidence for daily life is the Life and Registry that has recently been re-edited and translated by the late Jonathan Riley Smith and his team. Now available on the internet in English, it provides a wealth of economic information. It enables us to follow the transfer of landed property in different decades and to evaluate the pace of the economy, which Anna Goodgart has done. It should be noted, however, that it includes only the archives of religious institutions, because those survived: the Holy Sepulchre, the Hospitallers, and the Church of St. Mary of Jehoshaphat. The Templar archive is mostly lost, and more importantly, the royal register has not survived. So only when a king or one of the nobles donated or sold land to one of the churches is there a record of it. So again, the picture is skewed and partial, but even so, is not consistent with the pictures others has drawn of an empty city without water and without inhabitants. The sources do mention the problem the poor faced in obtaining water. Sorry. We have to go back. Eris, can you see what happened?
Yeah, just if you can put the slide again with the television, and
yes, I'm trying. It doesn't work.
Okay, if you can click on one of the other slides on your side.
Okay.
And now try to use to press again the television button.
It doesn't work. I don't know why.
Can you press F5? Press F5.
Function 5?
Yeah, the button F5.
Okay, we're back to the main.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. We need those magicians that know what to do with the computers. So this is a modern reconstruction of medieval Jerusalem by Dan Bahat. And I want you to note the water reservoirs he depicts in medieval Jerusalem. For example, near the hospitaller compound, we know from the sources that they were washing their patients, which in itself was quite a novelty in the Middle Ages and might have helped them. But it also needed water, and apparently they did have water. The sources do mention problems with water in years of drought, but also show that solution could be found. Thus, the munificence of one Germanus helped the poor to get water in a difficult year. Pilgrims who flocked to the city were not necessarily used to running water and aqueducts in their homelands, and the need to endure less luxurious conditions did not deter them from making the journey. And finally, splendid buildings and archaeological remains provide unambiguous testimony to Jerusalem's centrality as a site for pilgrimage under the Franks. In his monumental study, Pringle mentions 83 Crusader churches in Frankish Jerusalem. True, many of them were not built from scratch, but were rather given a new Frankish appearance. But even those additions demonstrate an enormous financial investment in public buildings. Whereas the sheer number of the churches does not indicate the number of inhabitants, as many of the churches were pilgrim sites, Frankish building activities employed a host of masons, builders, sculptors, painters, and some of them were specifically mentioned by name and profession in a document dealing with the village of Mamoria that belonged to the Holy Sepulchre. Look, for example, at the splendid mosaic of Jesu in Majestatis, the Ascension, on the ceiling of the Golgotha in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The modern mosaic added at the same place are very far from the level of medieval art. That's one of my favorites. The lintels on the entrance to the church, this photo is from before the time when the British Mandate took off the lintels and transferred them to Rockefeller Museum, where they are today. We see here the special character of Frankish art. There were shared architectural designs and features that each artist or school of artists had free rein to implement the style with which they were familiar from home, creating unity based on diversity, as befits a society of immigrants. The western lintel is historiated, illuminated with decorative designs that tell the events of Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem. And the Last Supper here, the Last Supper and the entrance, and the other side we have the resurrection of Lazarus and the meeting with Martha and Mary. The eastern lintel is completely different. It shows scroll works inhabited by mythological figures like sirens and centaurs, and male naked figures pointing at the genitals in the holiest place of Jerusalem. But these very different lintels stood side by side as part of the general design of the doors. The general design of double doors on 2 levels, accentuated by the pillow-like frame and the receding arches, leading the visitor into the church, and 3 receding columns flanking the entrance provide harmony and unity, even though each column is executed in a different style. For those of you who remember Santiago de Compostela, you'll see that the general design is quite characteristic of the Romanesque. So we have a unified design and diverse details. The capitals outside, on the way to the Temple Mount, flanking the door, again, here you have even different columns. 1 single column and 1 entwined one, and completely different capitals, but the exactly same pair is flanking the other side. The capitals outside the Church of the Ascension on Mount of Olives, another favorite of mine, are intricate and beautiful. Again, each one exhibits a different style. See, capitals side by side, completely different style. And the famous rosette window today in Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. Those are just small examples, but it seems unlikely that such creativity and level of investment stemmed from a poor, empty city. I would like to end with 2 recently discovered sites belonging to Frankish Jerusalem, where the different sources mentioned above provide a closer glimpse of everyday life in Frankish Jerusalem. Just a minute. Here. The compound of the Hospitallers south of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is well known, the today Muristan era, is well known from the sources. Looking at the modern aerial photograph, we can enter Jerusalem like the medieval pilgrim through Jaffa Gate and see the citadel and Tower of David on our right. Moving along David Street, the market, we see the large compound of the Muristan in the Christian quarter, where the Hospitaller Church, hospital, and hospice were situated. Here, here we see the recent excavations showing great halls in the southeastern part of the quarter. The pilgrims, John of Würzburg and Theodoric, describe the hospital in Jerusalem that housed 1,000 beds or 2,000 patients every day who received care there. Amit Rehem and Ilya Berkovich have published an article about these newly discovered vaults that testify to the hospital's splendor. For whom was it built? According to the Chronicle William of Tyre, Jerusalem residents would not go into a hospital. They would summon the doctor to their homes, and unfortunately, in his opinion, these were often Muslim or Jewish doctors. Hospitals were built and maintained for pilgrims and wayfarers. And as this site was one of many, you have a German hospital in the Jewish quarter, there was a hospital at St. Mary of Josaphat, there was a Hungarian hospital. And again, it indicates that large numbers of pilgrims who needed medical care and hospitality visited Jerusalem. Here we see the typical Frankish stonework part of those walls. About a year ago, a building too large and elaborate to be a private house was found during a salvage excavation in the street of the Chain, the Temple Road of Crusaders of Frankish times, on the way to the bridge to Bab el-Shilshala, the so-called Beautiful Gate that we mentioned before. By comparing the description called La Cité, and next to the account by the chronicler called Ernul, archaeologists and historians came to the conclusion that this building was a boucherie mentioned by Ernul. You see, you go down the great street from David's Gates, that's where it's written. You go there and you see that. A little further along the street that is called David Street is the street of the Patriarch, and then one goes on. To the right, there is a street by which one goes to the Hospital of the Germans. That is this Gavledach of today. To the left, as one goes down the street to the temple, is a butcher's, where meat is sold in the city. This institution, on the main straight street to Templum Domini, this is during the excavations, the first floor of the boucherie. You can see it is a large room with another opening to part of the compound. This is a window we saw before, a typical Frankish window. This ground floor of the same building, and that's probably where they slaughtered the animals, and the underground floor, that was the sewage of the city under the main street. This butchery again shows the need to cater to the culinary needs of transient visitors and regular inhabitants in a vibrant city. It shows that the area west of the Temple Mount here was not empty as depicted in modern maps of Crusader Jerusalem. This is Dunbar's map of the Temple Mount. This is a bridge with St. Gill Church, and here should be the butchery. Nobody would build a huge butchery in an empty environment. Thus, Crusader Jerusalem was indeed a center, not only in the metaphorical religious sense, but stemming from that, a center of religious tourism and a magnet for crusaders and pilgrims alike. Frankish Jerusalem was built for and catered mainly to Christian pilgrims. More and more holy sites adorned with pilgrimage churches. Here is St. Anne, which is just adjacent to the pilgrimage church of Bet Chesda, side by side. These churches were added to meet the desire to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Modern Jerusalem is a magnet for pilgrims for all three monotheistic religions who seek the holy. In spite of the tension between the different believers, it is clear that one way for Jerusalem to flourish is develop tourism and pilgrimage to the city that remains holy to many worldwide. Thank you. And this is the lecture by Dr. Amit Dagan.
The lecture with Amit Dagan will take place on Sunday, the 31st of May. Hope for you to join us, and thank you for Professor Yvonne, and see you at the next lectures.
Okay.